Hi, my name is Danny Martz, and I am a training consultant at Experlogix. I train full-time CPQ and document automation. Today's topic is going to be on our advanced UX and UI, new themes and next-gen styles for CPQ. What does that mean? It means we've revamped our styles. We call these our V2 themes, and they allow us a lot more freedom for what we can do. The big thing that a lot of people will be coming here for is you can in fact now put categories side by side, but it's actually a lot better than that. If you know anything about the underlying technology of the web, what we're really talking about is a fundamental shift in the way that we've done our CSS. We're now using CSS Grid, which allows us to arrange categories kind of however we want. But we're going to start off actually looking at the previous version of themes because I want to start off with where we were prior to the V2 themes, prior to when we released version 9.7, which is when the V2 themes were released. And you will need to update your CPQ to at least version 9.7 in order for the V2 themes to work properly. This doesn't mean that if you upgrade to 9.7 you have to use the V2 themes. If you're happy with your legacy theme, or if you, let's say, have done a lot of CSS styling already. Maybe you don't want to upgrade your theme to the new version. You don't have to, just because you upgrade to version 9.7 or later. But after this talk, you'll have an idea of what's available to you with the V2 themes, and if that's something that you want to take advantage of. As I said, we're going to start off with what we used to have. Now, there's nothing wrong with our old themes. And if you look at them, you'll see that they are responsive, they are modifiable. You can actually do quite a lot with them, even without upgrading to the V2 themes. The way that you would do this, though, in the past, let's say that you wanted to make some sort of change, and it wasn't something that was available in the UI tools, or just by flipping a switch in one of your categories. You kind of want to do something beyond that. One of the natural places to do this is within the CSS. If you don't know about CSS, I do want to take a moment here. I'm just going to sort of drag something in from the other screen here. I do highly recommend you take a look at w3schools.com. They have a CSS course. If you have no familiarity with CSS or HTML, this would be a great place to start. It gives you hands-on experience. You can play around in a playground where you can change stuff and break stuff and not worry about what you're doing. That said, let me dive into some of the material that I wanted to cover. So you can see here it says we have a theme CSS and we're able to modify per element. What do I mean by that? Well, if we look at our old CSS, the way that this was done was it was a monolithic file, meaning there's just sort of one huge file for everything. And I'll show you what I mean. If I launch the configurator here, I'm going to go to F12 here. F12 opens up when you're in a browser. I'm in Chrome right now. F12 opens up the DevTools. And if you've never opened the DevTools, I highly recommend this as a way of exploring CSS and HTML. It allows you to modify in real time what you're seeing on the page. And that, I think, is the best way to learn. It's the way I learned how to use CSS. But we can also see what the sources are, meaning what files are we looking at here. And so if we look at our sources, we can see it's divided up. I'm going to maximize this here. If we look at the Experlogix folder here, we can open this up and we can actually see what we're getting. If we look at the site, we can look it's divided with images, pages, and styles. And if we open up the styles, which is what we're interested in right now, we'll see that we have a core theme. And then we have our Dynamics 365 theme, which is the one I've selected as the theme for this particular configurator. This is our legacy theme for D365. So you can see here we just have one CSS file. That means if we look at this file, this has all of our styling in it for everything that we've got. Now there's nothing wrong with that, it's just a little bit harder to maintain because if you want to update something, you have to find it in the file, and it can be tough because the way things are named isn't the most user-friendly. Now, you can find things. The way that you would actually find something if you wanted to change something is you would use this little guy right here, or at least this is how I would do it. And you can use this to select an element in the page, as you can see. So if I click on this and then I start mousing over things, it highlights them, right? So let's say that I wanted, for example, to change it so that my image here looked a little bit different. What would I do? Well, I could come over here to my CSS very directly, and I could add in, let's say, a border radius. Okay, and we'll just add a border radius of 50%, and that's going to make it as round as it can be. Now that doesn't look very good, but you can see right on the page we made a change. So if we don't want something that dramatic, we could, for example, just change this to like 100 pixels, and then we'd get a little bit of rounding at the edges. Now the interesting thing about this, if we go into our configurator here and we edit this, you'll notice this applies to all of the other images as well. And maybe we want that and maybe we don't. You are able to target things more specifically than that, but that's the basics, right? Once you figured out what you wanted to change, now in our case, we added a border radius, and you can see we've added this to the .xob. So this is the xob class, image tag, and then we have a little bit more addressing information here as well. But just realize what we would want to do here is we'd want to take this bit right here, and we can actually, I can actually copy this rule. What I can do now that I've copied is I can open up any text editor. Now this could be Visual Studio Code, this could be Notepad, whatever you want to use. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code here. And when I open this up, I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to just paste my rule. I've got this whole set of identifiers in here. Now, maybe I just want to do this to every image tag. Maybe I don't. But what I do know is that margin was already here. I don't want to necessarily include that because I really just want to include the changes that I wanted to make. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And now I'll just go ahead and save this, and it'll make me name it. So I'm going to go ahead and rather than put it in the styles directory there on that, I'm going to go ahead and put it on the desktop so that you can see exactly how we do this. I do need to make sure if I'm using like Notepad or something that I'm saving it with the right file extension. It does need to end in CSS like that. So for VS Code, I can just select CSS, and I'm just going to write, this is going to be example.css. So now I've got example CSS. Now what do I do with this? Well, if I want to make this change, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to upload it. So I'm going to open my publishing toolkit in my design center here. And I'm going to upload files to server. I'm going to go find this file. Now I put it on my desktop here, this example CSS file here. Let's go ahead and open that. And when I upload it, it will immediately start using it. Okay, so if I publish this again and reload it, it's going to reload with the new, it's going to reload with that new CSS that I added. So let's go ahead and refresh the page as soon as it finishes publishing here. And now when I refresh it, you can see that border radius information is in there. You can see that already from these rounded corners. If I were to go add a new configuration, it's going to be there as well. So even this, we didn't change this directly, but we can see the results, right? So I've added that new border radius here. And that's the way we used to do it. You would find the information in the large file. You could either modify it directly, although we don't recommend that because if you did an update, it might be overwritten. But you could create this small file like I did, the example CSS, upload it. It's going to start using it right away. And you can make all of your changes however you like over time. Now, there's nothing really wrong with having everything in one file, but it does make it harder to find things. So one of the things that we did in our V2 themes is we made it a lot easier to find stuff. We also added a whole bunch of functionality though, so we get both of those things out of it. I do have a database that I've prepared here to look at our V2 themes. It's similar to the aquarium here, but it's going to be set up for the V2 theme. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to go ahead and purge all to get rid of my other aquarium here, just so that we're not seeing both of those or running into any issues because of similarities. And we're going to go ahead then and publish. Now that we've got it published, we can of course refresh, but we're going to notice right off, this doesn't actually change the theme. Let's go ahead and add a new configuration here. This doesn't actually change the theme. What we're going to do is we're going to have to change the theme within our publishing toolkit, our site theme. Now this is a site level setting. So right now I've got CRM 2016 sample org as my target. So this would be whatever target you're using for your test or dev site out there in the really real world. But here we're just using this one I use for training. So I'm going to go ahead up into this box here and I'm going to type theme. And we're going to go ahead and scroll down and we're going to see our theme here is Dynamics 365. And if I do have the V2 themes available, meaning if I have an up-to-date enough installation, those will appear down here. You can see we have lots of different themes. I'm going to go ahead and do V2 D365 sales. Okay, now I've got D365 sales selected. Let's go ahead and save that. And we'll go ahead and publish again so that we can get our new theme. Now I haven't added any fancy CSS, so this is just the raw V2 theme. I haven't added anything yet. If I reload now that we've got this published, notice how different this is. And let me go ahead and add another configuration here. And we can see this is a really different theme. It does have some rounding on the corners. It looks much more modern than what we had before. We are still rounding our corners though, because we still have that CSS. I'm going to go ahead very quickly here and make a new quote so that we don't run into that old broken configuration link to my model that I deleted when I unpublished everything. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new quote and we'll just call this demo, elevate demo. I have to select a price list just to be able to save this, and I have to select a customer to be able to save this. So I'm going to just select the defaults here and we'll save this, and then we can configure this. All right, so we can see this is quite different than what we had before. And if we look here at our dev tools, before we even get into changing this back, right, the rounded quarters here, we might not want that in the same way. And we'll actually see we have a better way to do this. Okay, so if we look here and we go to our sources like we did before, and we can see under the styles directory here. So we had before just one CSS file, but now you'll see we have these different V2 themes. I'm going to open up the D365 sales folder here, and we're going to go and we can see the variables here. And that means that instead of just having to find the element that I want and then go change the one thing that I want to change and hope that it does what I want it to do, because we have these variables put in, if I want to change the base font family, I can really just go in and I can make that change. Font family text is here, and you can see the cascaded values here of which fonts it's going to use. There's information on creating your own theme and modifying it in our documentation. So if we just go to the knowledge base here and we search for V2 themes, we're going to find a bunch of articles, but we have modifying themes here. This is very cool. So you can see the instructions here, and it gives you instructions regardless of if you're using a legacy or a V2 theme. Now it is quite different just because the layout of just because the structure of things is so different. So make sure that you read this. We're not going to go through modifying an entire theme, but I did want to introduce you to this structure where we have these variables instead of just having to change individual values. It's much more powerful than what we had before. If we open up the core V2 themes and we look at the components, look at all this stuff. We have action panels and bulk, edit, and button group, all these different things. Whereas before you would have to look for each individual item like I did before. Now, you can still do that, right? You can still do that, but the organization is much, much nicer. And if I want to change something, I can find the file so much easier. The process, though, is very similar. If we want to make a change, we can come in here and I can hit the button here like I did before, and we can find, you know, for this category, let's say we want to change the way this looks. So we could change the border radius here again if we wanted to, or we could change the font weight. Let's change the font weight here. Now you'll notice it actually says region header font weight. Okay, so I can go to region header font weight. I just clicked on it, brought me here. So region header font weight is 400. Well, if I want to change this, or the font size, that'll be easy to see. Let's change this to 24. Okay, and so now you can see all of those change. What's very cool about this is just the region header font size, and as we saw before, if we go to my sources, if we go to my, open up this again, we go to my variables. If we go to my text, we can see all my base information, right? But if we go to our variables, now if I go to, if I go to my variables, now if I go to region header font size, we have a value of 24 here, which is we just changed. Okay, so we could then save this out and overwrite this file and change it. If you do that without modifying the theme, without creating your own theme, you do run the risk of when next time you upgrade, it's going to be overwritten. So just bear that in mind. You want to create your own theme if you want to start changing things like this. But once you do that, the sky's the limit. You can do lots of different cool stuff with this. So, star of the show, though, is I can put categories side by side. So now that we've decided that we want to modify our layout, what we're going to do is we're going to open up VS Code again, and we're going to just create a new CSS file. This is still something you can do. And you can actually use the same technique as before where you just upload this. So I'm going to save this file as, I actually have a file here in my desktop here called, make it a CSS file. And we should, maybe actually on my desktop, there we go. I'm going to go ahead and just save this over my category grid CSS here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a media query, okay? What this does is it actually tells it, hey, depending on the screen size that you have, you should display the layout differently. Now, by default, what we end up with is the layout we've got here where we have one column of categories, and they all look the same. Now, what we're actually doing is we're using a technology called CSS Grid to change this. And you can look up CSS Grid. It's not unique to Experlogix. And in fact, there's a link to some resources within our knowledge base once you get into editing the V2 themes. Basically what this does is it allows you to turn the page kind of into a table or a grid. And you can decide how different categories should occupy that grid. So if I wanted to have one category that went from top to bottom along the right, I could do that. If I wanted to just have a 2-column layout where it's bowl and then fish and then gravel and then accessories, I can do that too. And that's actually how we're going to start. But you can also make it vary with screen size, and that's very powerful. Let's show you what I mean here. I'm going to go back to my CSS file here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create that first media query. Now, instructions, again, are on the knowledge base for how to do this. So we're going to do a query for configurator size, and then we're going to compare it to the minimum width that we're going to allow for this layout that we're going to put in. So I have 48 rem minimum width. Now, 48 rem is actually pretty small. 48 rem is what we would use for a tablet. And within this media query, we're going to say for our series ID, I spell that right, series ID equal bowl. That's my series for my fish bowl that we were just looking at. And model ID bowl for the layout region. Now the layout region is kind of what our grid is made of, okay? So what we can do within here is we can specify a number of columns. And the way that we're gonna do this is we're gonna use a value called grid template column. This is just normal CSS grid. And we're going to establish a start and an end, which can be useful later. And we're going to say each one is going to be equal in size. Now, FR is a relative unit within CSS. And basically what it allows you to do is it allows you to say, well, if I want it to be equal, I would just give each one. But let's say I wanted one of them to be twice as big, then I would just say 2FR. What's nice about this, as opposed to using percentages, is if I wanted to add another column later, which I'll do, I can just add another column. I don't have to do my math again, right? I can just say 1FR, 1FR. Well, that's half the screen each. If I say 1FR, 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 well, that's a third of the screen each. I don't have to change them to 33s. I don't have to think and be right about stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just save this as is, and we're going to go ahead and upload it like we did before. It's my category grid file there. We'll upload it. And we actually don't even need to publish. And I did before, but technically you don't have to. I'm going to hit Control F5 or Control R to refresh. And you can see here immediately we've got a grid. What's even cooler is how this responds to being smaller. So if I shrink this, at some point we're going to hit that 48 rem that we established in our media query. And we're going to go back to our one column layout. Because what we told it is if the min width is at least 48 rem, well, now we want 2 columns. But if it's less than 48 rem, we want 1 column. Or rather, it's just going to use the standard layout that it is built in, because we haven't told it to do anything different. We could make a smaller entry as well. But we could also just copy this media query that we currently have, which is what I'm going to do. Just copy this here. And we can add in a 96 rem one, which would be like a regular computer, right? Now, if you get a really big workstation that has extra wide monitor or something, you might go bigger than this, but 96 rem is pretty standard, okay? And what we're going to do is we're just going to do what we talked about before. I'm just going to add another 1FR, okay? And so now we're going to get 3 columns. I have to upload it again to make sure that we get the update. Here's my file. I'm going to upload it. And let's go ahead and hard refresh it. So the Control R, the Control F5, and now we have 3 columns. But only if we're bigger than 96 rem, right? So if I squeeze this, eventually we're going to hit less than 96 rem. And it's going to flip to the 2 column layout. And then we're going to end up less than 48. And we're going to flip to the 1 column layout, the standard layout. Okay. But we could even go further than that. Remember, we can decide how big these should be. So what if I want the 3rd column to be, or whatever the last column is, let's make the last column twice as big as the other columns. Okay. So we're going to just change it to 2FR. So now that's 1 part, 1st column, 1 part, 2nd column, 2 parts for 3rd column. So 20, 20, 25, 25, 50. And here we have 33 and 67-ish, right? So 1/3, 2/3. Again, the beauty of using relative units like FR as opposed to percentages, which you totally can use. You could use pixels, you could use percentages, but by convention, we don't really do that anymore. Okay, let's upload this file. And we'll hard refresh the web page again, so it has to reload that style sheet information. And what do we see? We see 25, 25, 50 division. And now if we squeeze it, what do we end up with? 1/3, 2/3 of whatever the size of that container is, right? That's the beauty of that relative unit. And then we get less than 48 rem, and we end up in our one column layout again. Now, CSS grid isn't just columns, right? It's a grid. So if we want to get more complicated, we can. We can decide the shape and size that we want things. We can even include empty space if we want to. So how does that work? Well, let's say that I wanted my accessories to go all the way across the bottom, and I wanted to arrange it so that my fish was kind of the star of the show over here and bigger than everything else. And then my bowl and my gravel are kind of smaller selections, so we're just going to put them up here in the corner. So I'm not going to make you watch me type all that. I've got it on my clipboard here, so we're going to paste that in. I will explain what this is doing, though. You can see here what we've seen before. So we've got my query for my minimum width of 96 rem. Here we've got my, and in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace my 96 rem query. Let's just do that. So the 48 one will still work the same, the smaller one. So I've replaced my 96 rem query here. We've got our series ID and bowl and model ID, but we want to get more specific than that. So we're going to get into the region ID. Now the region ID, see bowl, category bowl. You can call out a region ID. You do have to have debug IDs enabled in your site settings, which I'll show you really quick here. You would just go to your publishing toolkit, go to the settings here, and you go to the CPQ settings. Okay, and you can see here if we scroll down, where is this? Debug IDs, right? So we can see the debug ID settings normally is none, and I have everything selected. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and change the 96 rem media query so that not only do I have columns like we had before, but we also have rows. So what is this doing? It's creating a grid where I have 2 FR column and a 1 FR column. Okay, so 2/3, 1/3. And I've named the space in between, I've named the dividing line between these sidebar. And then for my rows, I've just used the word auto. So basically what I'm saying is after the first row, I'm going to call that top bar. And then we have auto, auto, auto. So I have 4 rows total. I have a top and a bottom, and I can also reference top bar here. Now you can name these whatever you want. We name them sidebar and top bar, but you've got here for my grid column start for bowl, I've got sidebar and end. So it's just going to start here and go to the end. It's only going to be that 1/3 wide on the screen. How tall is it going to be? It's going to go from top to auto. What does that mean? Well, it's going to go until it hits something. Okay, so we're letting it decide. We're not specifying where it should start, or sorry, where it should end. We are specifying it should start on top. So this one's on top. What about my fish? Well, my fish is going to start at start, so the left for the column, and it's going to end at sidebar. It's going to start at the top, so we're in the upper left, and it's going to go to the 3rd row, so it's going to stop here. Okay, it's going to stop here, and you'll see what this looks like in a minute. We have our gravel. The gravel is going to go from sidebar to end, so only the right-hand third. And then from top bar to auto. So it's going to start at top bar. So start after that first row. And it's going to go down until it hits something. Well, what's it going to hit? It's going to hit my accessories. My accessories take up the whole width. They go from start to end. So that's 100%. And then the row they start on is 3. So they start where this one ends, where the fish ends. Now, if I made this 4, there would be an empty space, but we start at 3, so there's no empty space, and this one is just going to stop when it bumps in here. Now, if you mess this up, you can end up with a hidden category. So you got to make sure that you understand what's happening. And I actually recommend when I do this, I take a sheet of paper out and I draw my grid up. on a sheet of paper so that I can understand what I'm looking at. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this, and we will upload the CSS, just like we have before. Now we will hard refresh the page here. And what will we end up with? I mean, look at this. This is really, really cool, right? We have this full width thing. We still have our rounded corners here, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. But you can see it goes from one end to the other. This one, these ones don't. Now, that's my 96 rem media query. If I squish this down to 48, we still have our 1/3, 2/3 top and bottom. And if I squish it further down less than 48 rem, it's going to go to one column again. So you're not losing those things. We just changed our 96 rem media query. So if somebody's using a full-size computer screen, they get the benefit of this layout. And that's really all I have to show you for this demonstration. I've been Danny. I really appreciate you taking a look at this. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'll get back to you as soon as I can.